So I've just been walking around and I was thinking, because I was listening to a reading from a reader that I really like on YouTube. Her name is Spirit Guide Intuitions, Ceci Slayani. And she was saying something that is a touchy subject because of just, it's so personal. It's so mixed in with the personal. But she was talking about the queer community, and specifically she was talking about men who are in the closet and are still dating women. Even though, like, they're not usually, I don't think she's talking about bisexual men, at least not from what I could understand from what she was saying. She's talking about men who are mostly, at least romantically, mostly attracted to other men, and therefore would not ever really be able to truly lovingly commit to a woman that they're dating because they're just not attracted to them. And so I was listening, and she was upset, and she was expressing herself about how she felt about somebody in the comments who got mad and called her probably homophobic, because she had been talking about, she was doing a reading, she's probably talking about somebody whose boyfriend wasn't being honest about themselves, something like that. I don't know. I don't know what reading it was. I was just watching the video where she was addressing that because it was another reading, and it just, that's how it started out. And my interest was piqued because when I first watched her channel, I'm a queer person, so I would identify as queer or bisexual, and there's a lot of defenses that go up when you hear certain things as a queer person. So I know probably what triggered that other person that probably made the comment in the comment section. It's a thought that came across my mind too. And unfortunately, so I've been actually talking to my sister about this a lot recently. It's hard because, and I'm gonna speak, there's many layers to this. So Ceci Slayani is a Black woman, and she represents a part of me. To me, one of the reasons why I really resonate with her is because she represents a form of Blackness that, first of all, I haven't gotten to see a lot in the tarot community, and it's just kind of like it's like a ghetto Blackness, and it's the thing that we've always been taught to be ashamed of, but she's just very openly herself. And this is ghetto in, like, not a negative context at all, because I don't see ghetto as a negative thing, though I've been taught to, and for a while I was ashamed. But as I've stepped more into who I am, I resonate a lot with her energy and the way she expresses herself, and just her tone, you know? She's very unapologetic. She's also very blunt and doesn't try to sugarcoat things. So she was talking about something that is a real issue. And my sister and I, who were both queer, and we've been speaking about how there's a lot that's going to need to eventually be addressed in the queer community, that because of where we are right now, we're also in a stage where people are just starting to get, rights and just starting to feel safe. Some people are just starting to feel safe in public spaces, that it's hard to also be like, okay, well, now we also need to bring up this. But there are a lot of issues, right? Me as a queer person who I feel like I don't feel super connected to the mainstream representations of queerness and to the more popular queer spaces. I don't feel very connected to them, and I think that that's because there's a lot of judgment, because there's a lot of performativity. Is that what it is? There's a lot of performance. There's a lot of rigid identities, and if you don't fit into these boxes, you don't get to exist in this queer space, or you're not queer enough. There's a lot of mean behavior. There's a lot of people who are bullies undercover. Like, it's the same people who would have been bullies in high school if they were popular, and if they weren't queer, they would have been a bully. Like, those people are the bullies in the queer community, but they're also popular. And that's partially just because queerness right now is also so media based and so like representation and diversity and so like social media. That's just the energy of queer spaces right now. And like you just look like there's a very specific identity box for like queer people, and you see it a lot on like with social media influencers or on TV shows or on TikTok. There's just certain ways that queer people exist, and it's just like that's just it. And it's the same thing with like certain mindsets. And I've spoken a little bit about like so I have a lot of problems that I think that queer people are going to have to address. And ultimately, I am somebody who believes that everybody's queer. I believe that sexuality is a spectrum in every aspect. So you're queer if you can find anyone attractive, but even if you don't want to be with them romantically or sexually, but you can still I just think everybody's queer, okay? And there's a lot of exclusivity in the queer community that a lot of people are basing their own value and other people's value around. And so there's a lot of like, well, you're only queer if you're like this, you know? And it's annoying. And I know that there's a lot of people who are queer but don't connect to the queer community and therefore don't participate in queer spaces and therefore aren't getting to have these conversations with other queer people because it's just like, it's easy to be put off by certain queer spaces and by a lot of queer people who haven't really found themselves yet, but are really attached to this identity, which is just, I don't know, this trying to fit in and trying to find a sense of belonging, but you're not really being yourself and you're actually probably being a mean girl or a mean person. But anyways, I've spoken a little bit about queer women and the way that they will make fun of and laugh at straight women for the violence that they face against men, faced by straight cishet men. I don't really believe in straightness, nor do I really believe in mono, like anything, like a single section. Like I just don't think anything's that rigid. I think everything's very fluid, including gender. But it's hard to make my language fit the way that I think or feel, because we're still evolving. But anyways, yeah, so I've spoken a little bit about the problems that I have with, it's a lot of lesbians and more mask presenting queer women, and just the way that they make fun of straight women and the way that they make fun of straight, like cishet sex, and just a lot of the violence and abuse that straight women take on and the way that they're just kind of laughed at by queer people. It makes me feel gross. We've already started talking about gay men and the way that they can be extremely sexist. There's conversations already beginning about trans women and the way that they can perpetuate sexism and be violent towards cishet women. There's a lot of conversations starting that are beginning to make the queer experience and conversations in the queer community a lot more complex. And to be honest, I'm very happy about that. It's scary because there's a very big chance for you to be written off as, all of these oppressive, written off as an oppressor because you're bringing up a conversation that's hard. But I'm feeling like it's at that point where you just have to talk about it and not be afraid, because we've also already accepted that canceling is a temporary experience. And so if you are canceled, as long as you know that you didn't do anything wrong, I think that you'll be able to move past it. So it's at that point where we just have to start having these conversations. And so anyways, yeah, we've all been moving towards a space where we're getting more comfortable expressing how we feel. And Ceci Slayani was talking about queer people who are in the closet and who are still struggling to be open, and the way that they will be in relationships with people that they're not attracted to and not tell them, and they could also be cheating on them and things like that. And it's a hard conversation, right? Because it's very difficult to come to terms with an identity, especially if you grew up in a space where that that way of being was not accepted and it wasn't safe. And just because we think that, being queer is already very accepted publicly, people's home life, you don't know what it's like. And just because something on whole seems accepted doesn't mean that it's truly okay. It doesn't mean that people will truly be safe if they are open about who they are, especially depending on what communities they're from. So I really am not in a space to judge people who are in the closet. I really am not. I'm very lucky I don't have a super pro-gay family, but I wouldn't be hurt because I'm not hurt because I am queer. So yeah, I'm not in a space to really understand what that's like. I can sympathize, but I don't know, right? But there is responsibility that you have to make sure that you're taking care of people. You're not allowed to use your trauma as an excuse to traumatize other people in the process of you finding yourself and trying to create space for yourself and trying to find love and compassion for yourself, right? So it's not okay to be in relationships with people that you're not attracted to, and especially romantic relationships where people are being extremely vulnerable, and especially physical, like sexual relationships. If you're not being honest about who you are and the fact that you can't ever actually give this person what you say you're going to give them or what you say you are giving them, that's a lie, and that's not really consensual. And so there is a lot of sexual violence happening against women who are more so attracted to men, from men who aren't straight, who aren't attracted to them. And it happens on both sides, but because of the way that women's attraction to other women is hypersexualized, and because of the way that men are told to find that to be like a sexual fantasy instead of being allowed to be hurt by that kind of betrayal, we more so talk about when men betray women in this way. But it's wrong on both sides, and I think it's sexual violence on both sides to know that you are not attracted to someone and you can never love them, but to intentionally and consciously enter into romantic relationships with them and sexual relationships with them without them being aware of how you truly feel and what their future holds. You are actively wasting somebody's time, and you're actively hurting and betraying them without their consent, because they're not aware of what you are aware of. So they are in the dark. That is sexual violence. That is emotional abuse, and that's relationship abuse. You're abusing your power, and it doesn't make you an evil person. As we begin to realize that a lot of us have participated in being an abuser, a lot of us have been predators, a lot of us have been abusers, we're going to be able to make that a much more complex existence, so that you're not going to feel afraid to take accountability because you're going to get canceled, or you're just going to be defined by this. No. Almost everybody, I'm sure, has been an abuser in one way or the other. I know I have. I know that almost everybody I know has. So we're just going to have to get to a space where we can accept that and take accountability and move forward. I was just talking about compassionate accountability when it comes to me. I've been afraid of men and like teenage boys for most of my life I've just kind of had like a disdain for them for most of my life, just because of fear, societal fear, and then fear from experiences that I've had. And I've just always naturally also felt more easily connected to women, and so I've also used that as a thing to feed into my fear, which has put me into a position where I would often I can be cold and just not care as much about men or relationships with them and things like that. And it's led me to act in ways that I don't think are appropriate. And so I've had to take accountability for that and really begin to intentionally change the way that I behave. But I'm trying to also, in that process, not just decide I'm a horrible person and throw myself away, right? Because we all make mistakes. We all have a lot to grow from, but it doesn't mean that we don't have value, Everybody's allowed to make mistakes and learn. So compassionate accountability. But yeah, there's a lot of conversations that I think we're going to begin having as a queer community, which is really just a human community, because gender's not real and neither is, and there's no rigidness in sexuality, if you ask me. Yeah, but I think that it's good that we're getting into a space where things are just going to be laid out on the table. It's scary because you don't want to say anything that hurts anybody, and you also have to acknowledge and remember that a lot of queer people who are recognizably queer are not safe in the world still. Trans women are they're not protected by many of us and by our systems, and especially Black trans women and just trans women of color in general. There's a lot of unsafety and there's a lot of isolation and violence spewed out against them. And we have to remember that just because things look different and there's a power, there seems to be a power structure on social media, and it appears as if communities that are also oppressed are also in power, because we're in an activist-based society where right now, like, your morals and your ethics are really connected to your popularity. So people who are more liberal, progressive, or in that space, that perceived space, have a little bit more social power right now, at least online in the digital world. But we have to remember the digital world and the physical world are very different places. And we're not all in these really big cities. We're not all in New York, where it might be a little bit safer, to be who you are. So you always have to keep that in mind as we're having these conversations, and be really compassionate and honest about, where people are hurting and how that feeds into the conversations that they're having and the way that they're existing in certain spaces and the reactions that they're having. Most oppressed people are operating from traumatized spaces, and so they're hurting people in ways that also that's hard to balance when you're also just starting to get some power, but it's not good power. We want to really be choosy with what kind of empowerment we're experiencing, and whether that's what we actually want, and whether that's the energy we really want to bring into this new space in the world where there's more acceptance, kind of, and a little bit more tolerance. What kind of power do we want to exist in that world, But yeah, you do have a responsibility, even if you are in the closet. And I mean, queer people have been having this conversation amongst ourselves, right? About how difficult it is to date somebody who's in the closet when you're queer, because you're being hidden and you're made to feel like a problem and like a burden, and your love doesn't get to be openly expressed. And that's hard, that's traumatizing, it's isolating. And so we've already had conversations about queer people not dating other queer people who are in the closet, and queer people in the closet needing to focus on their own healing right now, and it not being like everybody having the right to say that they don't want to be in a relationship like that, as hard as it might be for people who are in the closet. So we're already beginning to just really complicate these situations and allow for a lot of space and a lot of nuance. And now it's also going to feed into the world of people who are more so aligned with what we identify as straight, And we have to remember that just because you're oppressed in this one way does not mean you don't have the ability to be an oppressor in many other ways. And social power is power. And like moral and ethical power is power. So, you can abuse the things that also make you oppressed and wield them against people who, on whole, are decidedly your oppressors, in order to make them feel small and to silence them into not expressing themselves and their hurt. And that's not cool, and that is like actively being an abuser, and you do need to be accountable for that. And a lot of queer people do that. And I know that it comes from a place of trauma, but it's not going to fly forever. And so we might as well just begin to have these conversations, because it's all a part of the healing process and the liberation process. And I know it's hard to be wrong and to be called out on things, but it's important, right? Because we don't want to get into a space where only a few people are allowed to exist happily at a time. We want it to be equal, and that includes equity, but we want everyone to be able to be in a space where we can all exist in our heart-centered truths and hear each other and be accountable for ourselves and for making sure that we keep other people safe. And so in conversations like making sure that cis-het women or just cis women feel safe enough to use language about their bodies that they want to use, while also being able to understand that womanhood is self-defined and that gender is not real in like a static way. We can move into a space where we can hold space for both of those conversations and both of those uses of language, right? Things can be complicated and we can live in that complication, and it doesn't have to be a bad thing because it turns from complication to just complexity. And that is great. We want complexity, we want diversity, right? We can have conversations about making sure that cisgendered women aren't wielding their power and their privilege, while also making sure that trans women aren't wielding their power and their privilege, and making sure that we acknowledge that, the humiliation and the abuse of any woman, regardless of how she identifies in her womanhood and the context of her womanhood, is contributing to the abuse of all women, right? And that's on both sides. And just, also asking who benefits from these conversations when we're deciding, who's a real woman and what womanhood really looks like and what terms are women allowed to use, who benefits from that conversation. Because, interestingly enough, you don't hear many conversations about trans men unless it's also about women. But when it's just, you don't hear a lot of conversations about cis men and trans men, right? There's not a lot of conflict there. It's mainly around women and womanhood. And why is that? Well, we're also in a space where we're trying to move towards more progression and more freedom and more safety for women on whole. Why is it that these now conversations about the queer community are also being centered heavily around womanhood, and there's this conflict arising between these two communities that are really all a part of the same space and all seeking out the same thing, trying not to allow things to get complicated when they don't need to be. We don't need to be fighting. We are on the same side, right? Just acknowledging that. And also acknowledging that, this is a harder conversation because things are complicated, right? So many things existing at the same time. Let's always keep that in mind. But violence is something that is really heavily associated with womanhood right now. Trans women are experiencing immense violence. Cis women experience immense violence. And trans men, in the way that they are being disconnected from their experiences around the body, and the way that their bodies are being disconnected from them and what they can talk about and what they're part of when it comes to pregnancy and periods and things like that. That's violence too. They need access to those terms as well, and things like that. And we should be, I don't know, it's so hard. It's we need to get to a space where our language is more evolved so that this isn't so difficult, because right now it's so hard to talk about these things without messing up and misgendering or just saying things that that sound wrong, That's why it's such a scary space right now to share opinions about things like this, because you really want, when you have good intentions, you really want to make sure that you're taking care of people as you're having these conversations. And sometimes when it can be critical, it's hard to also take care of people, and it pushes a lot of us away from even wanting to be critical and to use critical thinking, because we don't want to hurt others, and we don't want to be rejected by society, because we also want to belong and we want to be a part of community, and we want others to know that we want them to also belong and be a part of these communities. So it is very hard, but yeah, I think it's good that we're getting into these conversations and we're just laying it out on the table instead of tiptoeing around it, because it is something that needs to be addressed on all fronts. I think the queer community has a lot to work on around meanness and the connection between bullying and popularity, especially on social media. I think the way that we treat womanhood, there's going to need to be a lot of conversations around that, and womanhood with all fluidity, all complexity. I'm not someone who believes in binaries or anything like that. Yeah, it's kind of like, I was talking the other day because I used to, when we started like really focusing on pronouns and things like that, I was voicing that I feel comfortable with people using they, them pronouns for me, as well as she, her. I identify as a woman, but I also feel very comfortable with they, them pronouns. I don't feel thrown off. I don't feel like correcting people. Like, that to me is absolutely fine. And I know that then that must be something significant to me, because I don't feel comfortable with he, him pronouns. I would correct somebody if they used he, him pronouns. You know what I mean? And so I've been in this space of feeling strange about using those pronouns and mentioning they, them when I also mentioned she, her recently, because I'm worried about taking up space in the non-binary community if I don't identify that way. And the reason I'm worried about it is because I'm wondering if I could be non-binary and also a woman. And I was thinking about it because I've also been thinking about this in tandem with sexuality, and I was like, I think everybody's bisexual, or like queer. I think everybody's queer in one way or the other. Just how I think everybody's on the spectrum in terms of like behavior and neuro stuff, whatever. I think everybody's on the spectrum. I think everybody's on the spectrum of queerness. Some are more aligned with straightness, and some are more aligned with like mono, like sexuality, with like lesbianism and gayhood. I don't know. But yeah, I was just thinking about that. And I was thinking about how could it be that bisexuality or pansexuality and queerness and non-binaryhood are like base, like foundation identities, like being human is, right? And then so you have you're a human being, and then you also could be that you're also black, and that you're from Nigeria, and that you're, but your human identity is your base identity. And could it be that being non-binary and being queer or bisexual or pansexual, I'm just thinking of queer identities that include everything. Like for me, I feel very connected to bisexuality, and I could use pansexuality as well. I don't think bisexuality means that you're only attracted to cis women and to cis women and cis men. I think bisexuality means you're attracted to everybody, and I don't really think I don't think that there needed to be this focus on a binary with bisexuality. It was just called bisexuality because we were still operating in the understanding of binaries, but every bisexual person I've met doesn't feel they don't support binaries. So I think that it was just a misunderstanding. But anyways, yeah, could it be that like bisexuality, pansexuality, queerness, and non-binaryhood are just base foundations that everybody has? Because I was thinking about it, and I don't believe in gender, but I do identify as a woman, right? Because I feel like a woman, and that's how I know that it's also nothing strict, because I can't explain to you why I feel like a woman, I just do, and I don't feel like a man. But I could connect to being non-binary as long as it didn't erase my womanhood, right? Does that make sense? So it's the same way that I think you could be bisexual and more attracted to women, or you could be bisexual and more attracted to men, or you could be bisexual and somewhere in the middle, or you could be bisexual and more attracted to people who are really in like their non-binaryhood. Like, do you get what I mean? You could have you could be on a spectrum even within that spectrum. Things are complicated, but I feel like we're all kind of non-binary and we're all queer. Because I'm telling you, I feel very comfortable using they, them. And it's also because they, them has been a pronoun that we've used for singular people throughout time. I was using they, them before we talked about the identity of being non-binary. I've always used that to address singular people, and it's not because I didn't also know that they identified or presented as a woman, or as a man, or as a girl or a boy or whatever, when we were really deep in that binary hood. It's not because I didn't know that. It's just that it didn't feel wrong, and no one had ever corrected me when I said they, them. It wasn't until we moved into a space where queerness became a focal point in our society that then people were like, why are you using they, them? Are they non-binary? You know, no one used to ask that question before. And I think that sometimes this is what happens when you go down a path of liberation. Everything gets called into question. And so even things that are actually fine and they don't need to be worked on begin to get worked on, and it makes people confused, you know? And it's all a part of the process. So ultimately it's all good and there's no problems here. I'm just having a conversation about it. But yeah, I think that that's happened with they, them pronouns. And I do think that the word non-binary and that space needed to be created. That was very important. So I'm not saying that that's illegitimate. I'm saying that that's super important that was created. And I think it's opened up a deeper conversation about the fact that maybe a lot of us probably can connect very heavily to non-binaryhood when it doesn't dismiss your other identities as well. There are people who probably identify as non-binary and that's it, and they don't connect with womanhood or girlhood and boyhood or manhood. And then there's people like me who I can connect to being non-binary and being a non-binary woman. You know what I mean? Like, that feels fine to me. I feel comfortable with that because I do think that I am non-binary. I don't exist in a binary. I don't adhere to the dismissal of, an entire other energy just because I'm identify as a woman. Like, I find my womanhood to be complex. I just like that term and I like the energy around it. And that's where I feel really comfortable and I feel like most of myself existing within. But my basis is a non-binary hood, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think we're in a really good and cool space where our conversations are just getting really interesting and complex, but I'm gonna try and feel more comfortable adding they, them to my pronouns again, and just seeing if I feel, because I know it feels scary because you feel like you're interrupting a space that doesn't belong to you. But if we're understanding that gender isn't real, then no one can tell me that doesn't belong to me if it's something that I'm comfortable with. And that's the thing that I was saying about the queerhood right now. There's just such strict definitions around how you can exist in that space. My explanation of non-binaryhood is a valid explanation. Even though it differs from right now what we understand it to be, it doesn't mean that it's illegitimate. And so me expressing that openly and standing strong in that is potentially creating a space for other people who feel the same way but didn't know that they were allowed to feel that way to express themselves, and now stand in that as well, and ultimately adding more diversity and complexity to queerness and ultimately humanizing it, because we're understanding that being queer and is the same as being human. You know, being non-binary is the same as being human. Being on the spectrum is being human. All of these things are being human, you know? So, yeah, I'm glad I got to explain that. And it's connecting to everything that I had been thinking about as I had been on this path walking. And I had been taking other turns and things hit me in the face, and it's just funny to me. So, yeah, but anyways, happy Saturday. Thanks for listening. Bye.